Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where the air smells faintly of pine resin and grilled fish, where the river hums softly under a sky just beginning to blush with evening, and where paper lanterns, each shaped like a fat, smug carp, bob gently on the darkening water. You can hear them too, in a way. Not the fish, of course, but the faint crackle of candle flames inside thin paper, the occasional plop, as a lantern leans too far and tips against the current. It's the night before the Carp Festival in a sleepy riverside town in medieval Japan. And while you might think this is the kind of festival you could just stroll in unprepared, you probably won't survive this without at least 3 bowls of rice, a strong cup of tea, and the ability to dodge overexcited children wielding carp-shaped kites. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you're right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The lanterns are the first thing you notice. They're not scattered randomly, but arranged with a kind of quiet intention, bobbing along ropes strung across the river like sleepy jewels. Each one is painted, some with scales so detailed they shimmer when the candle inside wobbles. Others with faces that are clearly attempts at humor, their big red lips smiling absurdly wide. A few children, standing on the low stone embankment, lean out with sticks to nudge them into better alignment, their sleeves dipping dangerously close to the water. The whole town smells like anticipation. Well, anticipation and soy sauce. From a tea house window, steam drifts out carrying the savory scent of grilled river eel. Down by the dock, fishermen are just tying up their boats for the night, their nets heavy with the day's catch. They're not festival carp. Those are specially raised, pampered almost, but these will still find their way onto skewers tomorrow. You pass a row of shuttered shops, their paper screens glowing dimly from within, and hear the scratchy rhythm of someone sharpening knives. Not the sinister kind of knife sharpening. This is festival preparation, where every blade is honed to slice radishes into perfect spirals or cut fish with a single clean stroke. Somewhere nearby, a samisen plucks out a tune so slow and meandering it feels like it's already preparing you for bed. A cluster of lanterns drifts closer to the dock where you're standing, and an old man in a straw hat uses a bamboo pole to guide them away from the mooring ropes. "They'll tangle if you let them," he mutters without looking up. His voice is gravelly, the way river stones might sound if they could complain. You ask if this is part of the festival, and he chuckles. Not yet. Tonight's just the river remembering how to hold light. Historians still argue whether carp festivals like this were purely symbolic, celebrating perseverance, transformation, and seasonal change, or whether they had a more practical origin in riverside communities who relied heavily on fish. The truth is, in towns like this, symbolism and practicality swim together like 2 carp in the same current, their tails brushing every now and then. Somewhere upriver, you can hear the soft thump of a taiko drum. Just one, slow and spaced out. It's not a call to action, but a reminder, a heartbeat for the night. You follow the sound over the gentle curve of a wooden bridge, pausing halfway to watch the lanterns from above. From this height, they look like constellations someone accidentally dropped into the water. A breeze lifts the edges of your sleeves, and you can smell the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers from the temple gardens nearby. On the far bank, the path narrows, hemmed in by tall grass that hisses softly when the wind stirs. Fireflies dart in and out of the shadows, their tiny glows echoing the lanterns below. You pass a group of women kneeling by the water, washing vegetables in woven baskets, their voices low and rhythmic, like a chant. Every now and then, they glance toward the river, as if expecting it to answer back. By the time you circle back to the main street, the lanterns have drifted further downstream. The crowd has thinned, and the shopkeepers are beginning to pull in their signs. You catch sight of a single carp banner hanging from a second-story balcony, its painted eyes staring fiercely into the night, as though daring the river to challenge it. There's a kind of calm that settles over the town once the sun is fully gone. The laughter softens, the clatter of dishes fades, and the air takes on a slightly cooler edge. You realize that this is the festival's true beginning. Not tomorrow's parade or the games or the feasts, but this moment right now, when the water holds the light and the people hold their breath, waiting. The morning mist clings to the river, like it's not quite ready to let go. You wake to the muted sound of wooden sandals clacking on stone, a measured rhythm that feels older than the town itself. When you slide open the paper screen of your lodging, the air greets you with a damp coolness, scented faintly with cedar from the beams above, and something warmer, grilled rice balls from a street vendor already at work. The marketplace is half shrouded in pale gray, and it makes everything feel slower, softer. Merchants move in silhouettes, their outlines wobbled by the rising steam from their cooking pots. The first thing you notice are the wooden tubs, rows of them, each filled with water, so clear you can see the pebbles at the bottom. And in them, dozens of carp glide lazily in circles. Some are gold, some mottled with white and black, and some are a deep red so vivid it seems painted on. They flick their tails occasionally, sending ripples that distort their reflections. A man with a neatly tied headscarf kneels beside one tub, ladling water carefully from one barrel to another, as if the fish might bruise, if he's careless. Festival stock, he says without you asking. Raised in still ponds since spring. They're calmer than wild ones, but stronger swimmers. His voice carries a note of pride, like he's discussing a nephew who just aced an exam. From behind him, a woman in a navy blue yukata arranges small lacquered boxes on a table. Inside each, pickled vegetables sit like tiny, edible jewels. She leans toward you conspiratorially and says, "Buy now, or you'll be left with the radishes no one likes." You're not sure whether it's a joke, but you end up buying one anyway. The mist seems to muffle sound, so when the first hawker calls out, it's like hearing an instrument strike a sharp note in an orchestra of whispers. He's selling sweet dumplings on skewers, dipping each one into a sauce that bubbles thickly in a clay pot. A group of children swarm him, coins clinking, their voices breaking through the morning hush. They're already dressed in festival yukata, the patterns dotted with tiny carp that seem to swim whenever the fabric shifts. You wander further, past stalls draped with strips of dyed cloth. One vendor dips his brush into a pot of black ink and writes the kanji for fortune in long, elegant strokes on pieces of thin paper. He hangs them on a string where the wind makes them dance slightly, as though the characters themselves are impatient to join the celebration. Historians still argue whether such talismans were genuinely believed to influence the success of the festival, or whether they simply became part of the atmosphere, like music you hum without thinking. At the far end of the market, you find a stall entirely devoted to festival toys, spinning tops painted with red and gold scales, small paper windmills, and wooden whistles shaped like fish. The merchant demonstrates one for you, blowing a tune that sounds suspiciously like it was made up on the spot. Supposed to mimic the call of the river spirits, he claims. Or maybe it just annoys the neighbors. Depends who you ask. The sun begins to push through the mist, and the marketplace brightens in slow, honeyed increments. Shadows sharpen, colors deepen. The carp in their tubs begin to swim more actively, as if they've sensed the change. Somewhere, a kettle whistles, followed by the rustle of tea leaves hitting hot water. That smell, grassy, faintly bitter, threads its way through the warm scents of grilled fish, fried batter, and sweet bean paste. A boy runs past you carrying a bundle of bamboo poles, nearly tripping over his own feet. Behind him, a vendor yells something about, "Watch the tubs," and for a moment you picture a heroic carp leaping to freedom. But the fish remain unbothered, circling in their slow, deliberate way. Near the river's edge, an older woman is selling fresh herbs, sprigs of shiso, bundles of chrysanthemum leaves. She tells you, unprompted, that in her grandmother's day, these would be tied above the doorway during the festival to keep the fish spirits from stealing your dreams. She winks, and you can't tell if she's entirely serious. As the sun climbs higher, the mist thins to nothing, and the market becomes louder, busier. The tubs of carp glint under the stronger light, and their scales flash like coins. You realize the festival isn't just something that happens here. It's something the whole town inhales together, a current that pulls everyone along, even in these quiet hours before the official start. You head back toward the center of the market, weaving between stalls, the sound of bargaining, laughter, and the occasional splash mingling into something that feels like a soft prelude. Tomorrow, the river will roar with color and music. But today, in the mist, it's all still gentle. You pause at a corner where tailors and artisans have gathered, their fingers nimble, their eyes squinting in concentration. The air smells faintly of wet cloth and ink, mingling with the ever-present river scent that seems to seep into everything in this town. You watch as a tailor holds up a bolt of bright indigo fabric, measuring carefully before cutting, then folding it with precise, almost ritualistic care. These are not ordinary garments. They are festival yukata, each one destined to be worn by children, elders, and the occasional overly enthusiastic traveler like yourself. The patterns are elaborate, swirls that mimic water currents, scales that shimmer in sunlight, and, of course, carp motifs so lifelike they could leap off the fabric at any moment. Beside him, a painter dips a brush into a tray of vermilion ink, and with careful strokes, begins decorating a carp banner, so large it could easily block the sun if it were unfurled on the river. You crane your neck to follow the brush, fascinated by how every line seems to capture movement. Curves for the tail, delicate arcs for fins, eyes that somehow convey both mischief and dignity. You lean closer, inhaling the faint, metallic tang of the ink, and notice a tiny smudge at the corner of the mouth that looks suspiciously like a cheeky smile. The painter glances up and winks. "A little humor keeps the spirits entertained," he says. Historians still argue whether carp banners originated purely from symbolic reverence, or whether they were originally an inventive way to guide boats during river festivals. In either case, you can see why the symbolism sticks. The banners sway gently in the breeze above your head, teasing the air with movement that feels alive, like the river itself is trying to join the preparations. Children run past, balancing tiny versions of the banners on bamboo poles. One trips and the banner flops over dramatically, eliciting laughter from his friends and a resigned shake of the head from a nearby tailor. You remember the earlier market chaos and realize that every corner of the festival is a rehearsal, a prelude to the main celebration. Everything has its rhythm. The carp in tubs, the merchants at their stalls, the tailors and painters, the children practicing dances, all moving toward the same quiet crescendo. On a low bench, you spot a woman carefully stitching gold thread along the edge of a sash. The threads catch the morning light in tiny, glinting bursts. She hums a tune as she works, slow and deliberate, almost meditative. You notice the pattern she's stitching. Small carp swimming upstream in an endless loop. "Upstream," she says softly when you ask, because that's where the carp show their strength. There's a lightness in her voice, but also a weight, a reminder that these festivals are as much about endurance as celebration. Nearby, another artisan arranges folded banners on the ground, painting exaggerated, comical expressions on the carp's faces. One sports a ridiculous mustache. Another has eyes that appear to be rolling in surprise. The contrast between the serious, traditional banners and these playful versions makes you smile. A festival like this, after all, needs room for both reverence and amusement. You meander down the row of stalls, noticing the way sunlight flickers through gaps in the fabric and illuminates the workshops. You hear soft laughter and the scrape of scissors on cloth, punctuated by the occasional exclamation from a child testing the banner's balance. A small boy, holding a tiny banner taller than himself, tips forward, narrowly avoiding a tub of water and prompting a quiet collective gasp from nearby artisans. The boy straightens, banners wobbling, and beams proudly. In a shaded corner, a calligrapher sits cross-legged on the ground, ink brush in hand, recreating whimsical, fish-related proverbs for the festival goers. One reads something like, "Even a carp in pajamas dreams of rivers wide and free," and you can't help but chuckle at the absurdity, imagining carp wearing little yukata like the children in the market. Some scholars still debate whether these proverbs were meant to be educational, moral, or purely whimsical. Probably a mixture of all three. As the day deepens, the banners and yukata pile up in bright, uneven stacks, ready to be displayed. You pause to consider the patience required, the steady hands, the careful eye, the gentle teasing of the material to achieve just the right effect. The town is quiet in a way that belies its activity, a slow heartbeat beneath the bustling preparations. And for a moment, you find yourself almost wishing you could stay here indefinitely, following the rhythm of cloth, ink, and the occasional cheeky carp smile. You follow the narrow stone path leading to the temple, drawn by the faint aroma of incense and the rhythmic creak of sliding doors. The temple sits quietly on a gentle rise above the river, its wooden beams worn smooth from generations of hands brushing them in reverence or habit. An elderly monk greets you with a nod, his eyes crinkling like paper lanterns at the corners. He motions for you to sit on a low bench beside the small garden pond, where koi swim lazily beneath the reflection of a cherry blossom tree, petals floating like tiny pink clouds on the water surface. The monk prepares matcha with meticulous care, whisking the frothy green tea until it bubbles gently. You inhale the faintly bitter scent, mingled with the lingering aroma of incense and river air, and realize the combination is somehow calming in a way you hadn't expected. The carp, he begins, pouring the tea into delicate ceramic cups, are more than fish. They are symbols of perseverance and transformation. Their upstream struggle is a reminder that patience matters more than speed. You nod, taking a careful sip, feeling the warmth spread slowly from your stomach outward. He continues, leaning back slightly against the temple railing. In some regions, it was said that a carp could leap into a dragon if it ascended the waterfall. Historians still argue whether that tale was meant to inspire children, entertain adults, or both. Either way, it is why we honor them with festivals. You notice a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, as if he knows a secret that he isn't quite ready to share. A gentle breeze stirs the bell hanging above the temple entrance, producing a soft, hollow chime that punctuates his words. Somewhere in the distance, a child practicing the carp dance trips and laughs, the sound drifting up the hill like a bell of its own. You sip your tea again and catch a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness in the froth, likely from a touch of sugar or bean paste added for local taste. The monk gestures toward the koi pond. One particularly fat fish nudges the surface, sending ripples across the reflected cherry blossoms. Even here, he says softly, we watch their movements, learning about flow, timing, and stillness. Some days, it feels as though they teach us more than we teach them. You find yourself watching the fish for longer than you intended, noting how their tails cut arcs through the water, each movement precise yet elegant, like a slow, deliberate dance. Between sips of tea and quiet observation, he shares fringe tidbits, how in certain villages carp were believed to carry messages to ancestors during festival nights, or how some monks would paint miniature fish on the soles of their sandals to invite good fortune. You chuckle at the idea, picturing a line of elderly monks tiptoeing across temple grounds with tiny carp on their feet, and the monk chuckles too, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a breeze. You notice his hands tremble slightly as he pours another cup. Even the slowest movements have meaning, he says. Even mistakes matter. This is the essence of the festival, celebration of effort, care, and small wonders. Somewhere down by the river, a boat bumps gently against the dock, and you catch the smell of grilled eel and fresh herbs wafting up, mingling with the faint sweetness of the tea and the earthy scent of stone and water. You linger here for what feels like an eternity compressed into a few breaths. The temple, the garden, the fish, the monk, and the distant laughter all meld into a gentle lullaby of life along the river. You notice the way the bell's chime hangs in the air, fading gradually, yet leaving a soft echo that seems to synchronize with your own heartbeat. Historians still debate how much of the modern carp festival owes to temple influence, but sitting here, you feel as if all the stories converge into a single, quiet truth. Patience, reverence, and lightheartedness are inseparable in this ritual. Finally, you rise from the bench, brushing off your knees and inhaling one last deep scent of incense, tea, and river. The monk bows slightly, and you bow in return, realizing you've absorbed more than just stories. You've absorbed rhythm, atmosphere, and a subtle understanding of what it means to honor even the smallest of creatures. As you step back onto the stone path, the temple bells continue their slow chime, accompanying your steps like a soft, guiding hand. You follow the path down to the riverbank, where the early morning light glints off wooden oars and dew-slick stones. Children are already at work, practicing carp dances with exaggerated hops and flailing arms, their laughter echoing softly across the water. Some wear tiny yukata adorned with swirling carp patterns, while others balance miniature banners on bamboo poles taller than themselves. Each movement is carefully timed, yet there's a playful chaos in their steps that makes you smile. A gust of wind catches a banner, and a boy yelps as he lunges to catch it, narrowly avoiding a puddle that would have soaked his sandals. The river itself seems alive. Its surface ripples gently under the morning sun, reflecting the colors of the banners and the sky above. You step closer and notice that even the carp in the water seem to sense the excitement. They dart in small groups, tails flicking in unison, as if rehearsing their own dance. Historians still argue whether the festival's choreography was inspired by actual fish movements or whether it's human imagination projecting itself onto nature. Either way, the connection is undeniable. The river and its carp dictate the rhythm of the celebration. Nearby, a small troupe of musicians practices with wooden flutes and drums. The notes rise and fall, slow and uneven, yet soothing, forming a musical undercurrent to the children's clumsy steps. One drummer, a wiry man with a sun-weathered face, pauses to wink at a child struggling with a banner. "You'll get it," he calls, tapping the drum gently. Even the carp started small. The boy beams and resumes, making the banner sway dramatically in the breeze. You notice how the adults move in parallel, guiding and correcting the children with soft, encouraging words rather than strict commands. A woman kneels beside a small boy, adjusting his grip on the bamboo pole while murmuring advice. "Keep your elbow up, not too stiff." Like this, she demonstrates, her hands mimicking the gentle sway of a carp's tail. You realize that the whole festival, at its core, is a series of layered lessons: movement, patience, timing, and community. A fisherman passes by, balancing a basket of carp caught earlier that morning. He pauses to watch the dance, muttering under his breath about how he once tried to teach his own son the steps, only for the boy to tumble headfirst into the river. You suppress a laugh, imagining the scene: water splashing, banners flopping, and a father's resigned grin. Some fringe accounts suggest that these playful accidents were even encouraged, as a way to remind everyone not to take the festival too seriously. The scent of river mud mingles with smoke drifting from nearby kitchens, where families prepare small offerings of rice cakes and skewered fish. Children occasionally pause mid-step to peer at the food, their noses twitching at the smell, and a few bold ones sneak a taste when no adult is looking. You watch a particularly determined girl balance her banner on one hand while nibbling a rice cake with the other, and you can't help but admire her dexterity and her commitment to mischief. As the morning sun rises higher, a gentle breeze rustles the surrounding trees, making shadows dance on the riverbank. A group of older children practices a synchronized jump, attempting to mimic the leap of a carp upstream. They fall short a few times, splash into the shallow water, and erupt in a laughter, dragging the banners through puddles. You notice the adults quietly cheering them on, guiding their movements without interfering too much, and realize that this balance between structure and freedom is a hallmark of the festival. A small boat drifts lazily by, carrying two men who occasionally dip their hands into the water to nudge a floating lantern closer to shore. Their presence is almost ceremonial, a subtle reminder that the river itself is an active participant in the celebrations. You step closer to watch, fascinated by how humans and water creatures, young dancers and floating lanterns, all weave together into a single, flowing choreography. By mid-morning, the riverbank is alive with activity, yet retains a sense of calm. The children's laughter, the soft drum beats, the gentle slap of oars, and the occasional ripple from a fish combine into a soothing symphony. You breathe in deeply, smelling fresh river water, ink from the nearby banners, and the faint tang of fish from the fisherman's basket. Every sense feels engaged, yet nothing is overwhelming. The world here seems to expand quietly, inviting you to step fully into it. The day continues with slow, deliberate practice. The children repeat movements, the banners flutter, the carp swim, and you notice the subtle ways everyone, young and old, responds to each other and the river. Small gestures, a nod, a shared laugh, a careful placement of foot, create an unspoken language that binds the festival together. You realize that the carp dance is more than performance. It is a meditation in motion, a gentle rehearsal for the larger celebration that will unfold over the coming days. You step away from the riverbank for a moment, drawn toward a narrow alley where the air smells faintly of ink and damp paper. A small calligrapher's shop sits tucked between two larger buildings, the wooden sign above the door painted with a single, elegant kanji for carp. Inside, the walls are lined with scrolls, each depicting carp in various states of motion, leaping, swimming, even dozing lazily in shaded ponds. You notice some are surprisingly whimsical, a carp wearing a tiny samurai helmet, another holding what looks like a paper fan. The shopkeeper smiles as you peer closer. Stories, he says, some true, some, well, let's say creative. The shop smells faintly of ink, soot, and the mustiness of aged paper, but in a comforting way, like a library that has long welcomed readers. You pick up a scroll depicting a carp attempting to leap over a waterfall. The lines are dynamic, almost frantic, yet the artist has captured a sense of determination and humor. Historians still argue whether these illustrations were purely decorative or served as moral lessons. The shopkeeper says, polishing a brush. Either way, people love to tell these tales to keep the festival lively. You sit on a low stool and watch him demonstrate a simple technique. He dips the brush into a tray of black ink and draws a single, fluid line across the paper, then another to form the body, and finally delicate arcs for fins. The whole movement is hypnotic, like watching a river ripple slowly in the morning light. You find your gaze tracing the lines, as though the carp on the page might swim off if you look long enough. Behind the counter, stacks of smaller scrolls await buyers. One depicts a carp blowing bubbles, each bubble containing tiny, impossible scenes, miniature boats, tiny festivals, even a small cat curled up under a tree. You laugh quietly, imagining the cat as a festival participant, silently judging all human missteps. The shopkeeper notices and nods. People love the little absurdities, he says. It keeps history from feeling too serious. You notice a faint smell of green tea, and the shopkeeper offers you a cup from a tiny kettle. The warmth is welcome, and the taste is slightly grassy, perfect with the faint sweetness of the morning air. As you sip, he tells you a story of a particular carp that supposedly swam upstream so vigorously it inspired a village to hold the first banner parade. Some claim it was a literal event, others argue it was metaphorical. You imagine the carp, exaggerated in memory and story, leaping impossibly against the current, its scales catching sunlight like tiny mirrors. Outside the shop, you hear children laughing again, practicing chants that will accompany the dances later. Their voices are high and light, mingling with the distant drumming and the soft slap of oars against boats. The combination of sound and the scent of ink in the air gives you the sensation of being suspended in time, a witness to both the preparation and the playful imagination that fuels it. A few scholars suggest that the whimsical carp illustrations were intended as mnemonic devices, helping townspeople remember the sequence of events in the festival or the moral lessons associated with each dance. Others believe they were simply a form of entertainment, keeping spirits high and attention sharp during long, repetitive rituals. You tilt your head, thinking about how even centuries ago, people seemed to understand the importance of humor, of lightness, even in serious traditions. You notice that some of the scrolls depict fantastical elements, a carp carrying a tiny umbrella to shield itself from rain, another wearing a ribbon around its middle, poised mid-leap as if attempting an acrobatic trick. You chuckle at the imagination behind these depictions, realizing that the festival's charm lies as much in these human touches as in the actual celebration. Before leaving, the shopkeeper hands you a tiny scroll, folded neatly, depicting a single, serene carp gliding beneath a bridge. Take this, he says, so you remember that not every leap needs to be grand. Some are simply graceful. You tuck it carefully into your pocket, inhaling the faint mix of ink and paper one last time. As you step back into the sunlight, you notice the river sparkling, the carp in their tubs flicking tails, children practicing dances, and artisans moving quietly, almost invisibly. The world feels fuller somehow, the small stories and whimsical illustrations weaving seamlessly into the festival's larger tapestry. You realize that even something as simple as a scroll of carp has a rhythm and flow that mirrors the river, the children's steps, and the banners swaying in the breeze. The scent of smoke draws you next to the festival kitchens, tucked into a corner near the riverbank, where the hum of preparation is steady, almost meditative. You step closer, inhaling the fragrant blend of sizzling rice cakes, skewered fish, and roasting sweet potatoes. The cooks move with deliberate care, their hands skilled from years of repetition. Yet there's a playfulness in the way they arrange their ingredients, as if each skewer or dumpling has its own personality. A young apprentice balances a tray of glistening fish skewers, and one slips slightly, causing the chef to clap lightly and chuckle. "Even the fish have their own ideas," he says, tossing it back onto the tray. You wander among the cooking stations, noticing the subtle differences in technique. One cook grills the fish over a slow charcoal flame, brushing soy glaze carefully to produce a shimmering, caramelized finish. Another gently presses sweet rice cakes in a mold shaped like carp, turning them with tender precision so that each one emerges perfectly formed. You catch the faint sweetness of the bean paste filling as it mingles with the smoky aroma, and you realize that the festival's flavors are as layered as its decorations. Historians still debate how much of the festival's culinary tradition was driven by necessity versus artistry, but standing here, it's clear that both coexist. The meticulous care and preparation hints at ritual, while the playful arrangements and occasional slips suggest that enjoyment and laughter were equally important. You notice a small tray of skewered vegetables cut into delicate fish shapes, a whimsical touch designed to complement the festival's theme. Nearby, children hover around a low fire, helping with simple tasks, rolling rice into balls, brushing tiny soy-glazed fish, or sneaking a taste when the adults aren't looking. One particularly bold child attempts to dip an entire skewer into a bubbling pot of glaze, only to withdraw quickly when the sauce bubbles up and threatens to spill. You smile, thinking of all the small mistakes that will be remembered as anecdotes for years to come, and perhaps exaggerated a little in stories told decades later. The rhythmic sizzle of the grills, the occasional plop of something falling into water, and the soft murmur of conversation create a gentle soundtrack. You notice the cook moving with exaggerated slowness when brushing the glaze, as if performing a kind of dance. Even in the simplest action, there's grace, a measured artistry that mirrors the carp swimming upstream in the river nearby. The apprentice, younger and less practiced, imitates these movements, occasionally adding little flourishes of their own. You catch a glimpse of a chef kneeling to adjust a small basket of rice cakes, murmuring to himself, "Balance is everything," he says. "The flavor, the shape, the order, they all matter. And sometimes, the story behind the dish matters more." You nod, realizing that in this festival, even the food carries narrative weight, linking each bite to centuries of ritual, imagination, and celebration. A few fringe accounts suggest that certain festival dishes were deliberately shaped like carp, not only for aesthetic purposes, but to invoke good fortune or encourage children to emulate the fish's perseverance. Others claim that it was simply about playfulness, allowing artisans and cooks alike to add a whimsical layer to the day's proceedings. Either way, the visual and olfactory delight is undeniable. You pause near a low bench where a woman is glazing small skewers of river fish with painstaking precision. Her hands move slowly, almost hypnotically, dipping each piece in a shiny coat of glaze. "The fish have to shine," she murmurs. "Not just the carp banners, not just the scrolls. Even the food deserves its moment in the light." Watching her, you understand that every element of the festival, the banners, the dances, the scrolls, and the food, is part of a coordinated effort to elevate the ordinary into something memorable, gentle, and playful all at once. As the sun climbs higher, the kitchen smoke swirls upward, curling into the pale blue sky like lazy ribbons. The aroma carries across the riverbank, mingling with the scent of damp earth, ink, and freshly laundered banners. You inhale deeply, letting yourself be enveloped by the festival's full sensory richness. Somewhere, a child giggles as a skewered fish tilts precariously. The chef sighs in mock exasperation, and the river laps quietly against the dock. Standing there, you realize that these kitchens are not just preparing food. They are quietly setting the tone for the festival, infusing every bite with anticipation, care, and an almost imperceptible humor. You step back, taking one last look at the smoke, the skewers, and the apprentices practicing their movements, and feel a gentle anticipation ripple through you, much like the river itself. You cross the wooden bridge, your footsteps soft against the worn planks, feeling the faint sway beneath your weight. Moonlight bathes the river in silver, turning every ripple into a tiny, glimmering jewel. Below, the water moves slowly, carrying reflections of lanterns that have already begun their journey downstream. The carp banners hang high from poles, swaying gently, and you notice how their painted eyes catch the moonlight, giving them an almost sentient appearance. You pause, leaning over the railing, and for a moment it feels as though the river itself is holding its breath. The air carries the faint scent of pine from the bridge's timbers and the sweetness of distant festival sweets, mingling with the earthy aroma of the riverbank. Somewhere nearby, a child giggles as a lantern tips slightly in the current before righting itself. You realize that each element, the light, the water, the banners, the laughter, feels choreographed yet spontaneous, a living tableau of the festival in its earliest hours. As you step further along the bridge, you notice a pair of musicians tuning their instruments. A flute and a small drum, their notes tentative at first, testing the acoustics of the night. When they play together, the sound rises softly, echoing along the river and blending with the gentle lap of water against the wooden posts. Historians still argue whether music at carp festivals was primarily ceremonial or simply intended to amuse and accompany the participants. But in this moment, it seems both. The notes wrap around you like a warm blanket, setting the rhythm for what's to come. You look downstream and see the first preparations for the floating carp effigies. Boats drift lazily, each crew adjusting poles and rigging for the grand display tomorrow. One crew laughs quietly as a banner flutters too close to a post, causing a minor tangle. You suppress a laugh, imagining the carp themselves watching this chaos from beneath the surface. Somewhere upriver, a family releases a small paper lantern prematurely, and it drifts slowly away, carried by the current, casting a gentle glow across the water. A gentle wind stirs, carrying faint aromas from nearby kitchens where the morning's preparations linger. Smoky rice cakes, grilled fish, and the delicate scent of fresh herbs. The combination is oddly comforting, grounding you in the present while hinting at the day to come. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool air move across your skin and imagining the river carrying the scent downstream, mingling with countless others in a subtle, invisible tapestry. You notice the subtle choreography of life on the bridge itself. A cat slinking silently along the railing, children tiptoeing to avoid scaring the koi below, an old fisherman adjusting a line in a small boat. Everything seems to exist in balance, as though the river has its own rules and the town has learned to move gently around them. Fringe accounts even suggest that some carp banners were deliberately designed to mimic moonlight reflections on water, to enhance this harmony between nature and celebration. As night deepens, the lanterns seem to glow brighter, their reflections dancing with a slightly mischievous energy. You catch a glimpse of your own reflection in the water, and for a moment, it feels like you are part of the tableau, a silent participant in a centuries-old ritual. You lean over to adjust a lantern on the railing and notice how its paper trembles lightly with your movement, sending tiny ripples across the water. The bridge itself creaks softly with the rhythm of the night, in perfect sync with the distant drums, laughter, and the gentle rustle of banners overhead. You realize that this quiet observation, watching moonlight, lanterns, and carp banners, is itself a festival in miniature. Even without the crowds, the music, or the parade, the riverbank pulses with anticipation, an almost tangible energy that promises celebration, but delivers calm in equal measure. A small boat drifts past, carrying two figures carefully balancing a partially assembled carp effigy. They communicate in hushed tones, adjusting ropes and beams with practiced ease, ensuring that tomorrow's display will glide gracefully. You notice how every action, every brushstroke, every careful placement, every ripple in the water feels infused with patience, humor, and quiet reverence. The moon rises higher, and the world feels suspended between reality and dream. You take one last look down at the river, watching the lanterns drift lazily and the carp banners sway gently in the breeze. Somewhere, a flute plays a tentative melody, the notes rising and falling like soft waves. You realize that the festival, even in its preparatory stages, is already a story told in light, movement, and quiet human care. Dawn arrives softly, spilling pale gold across the river and turning the carp banners into living streaks of color. You walk along the riverbank, feeling the cool dampness of the morning grass under your sandals. Children scurry about, adjusting their miniature banners and practicing steps they've memorized over countless rehearsals. The sound of laughter mingles with the distant drum beats of early musicians testing their rhythms. The river seems to stretch and yawn under the sun, catching glints of light on its rippling surface that look almost like scales. You pause near a cluster of stalls where artisans are assembling the larger-than-life carp effigies. One man applies lacquer to a wooden frame, his hands steady despite the size and weight of the structure. Beside him, a woman carefully threads silk along the carp's body, adding subtle hints of red and gold to accentuate movement. You notice the way their gestures mirror the motions of real carp, tails swaying, fins fluttering. Historians still debate how much of these exaggerated designs were inspired by actual fish behavior versus symbolic embellishment. But standing here, you feel the convergence of observation and imagination. A group of older children practices synchronized jumps, attempting to mimic the carp leaping upstream. They fall short, splash into shallow water, and erupt into giggles, while supervising adults offer gentle corrections with amused smiles. The subtle art of encouragement threads through every interaction, from careful hands adjusting silk threads to whispered advice on precise dance steps. Even the occasional mistake is treated as part of the performance, a reminder that the festival is as much about participation and learning as it is about spectacle. Nearby, a vendor prepares stacks of folded banners for distribution, each one painted with playful variations. A carp wearing a tiny samurai helmet, one with a mischievous grin, another seemingly mid-cartwheel. You lean closer, noticing tiny, whimsical details in the brushwork that might escape a hurried glance. Some fringe accounts suggest these playful variations were originally meant to mock or tease the wealthier attendees, while others argue they were simply a creative outlet for artisans during long hours of repetitive work. Either way, the effect is charming. The air smells faintly of smoke and sweet bean paste from nearby kitchens. You spot a mother teaching her child how to carefully dip tiny rice cakes in a thin glaze, demonstrating slow, deliberate movements. The child imitates, occasionally smearing the glaze with a sticky finger, and you smile at the innocent messiness of it all. In a way, the food preparation is another form of dance, synchronized with the movements of carp banners, children, and the slow hum of the river. You follow the sound of water and discover a small boy kneeling by a tub, staring intently at a single carp. He gently taps the water with his finger, creating tiny ripples, and whispers something you can't quite catch. The fish flicks its tail lazily, ignoring him, yet the boy persists, fascinated by the smallest details. You realize that observing the carp is as integral to the festival as dancing or decorating, an invitation to pause and notice the world in miniature. In the distance, a group of musicians tunes their instruments, flutes, drums, and a small stringed instrument that produces a resonant, vibrating hum. Their notes blend with the river's flow, the children's laughter, and the soft clink of utensils from the kitchens. You feel the entire riverside pulsing with a quiet, anticipatory energy, a layered symphony of motion, sound, and scent that seems to promise a day filled with joy and gentle wonder. A fisherman walks past carrying a basket of freshly caught carp, carefully selecting the largest and calmest for tomorrow's main events. He pauses to watch a child balancing a miniature banner, shaking his head with a bemused grin. You imagine centuries of similar scenes, generations of carp festivals unfolding along the same riverbanks, each repeating and adapting the traditions, leaving tiny traces of whimsy and care behind. The morning sun climbs higher, warming the wooden planks of the docks and the polished frames of the carp effigies. You notice how light bends around the banners, creating shifting patterns on the water's surface, as if the carp themselves are reflected in doubled, distorted forms. Fringe accounts suggest that these light effects were sometimes intentionally harnessed, placing banners at specific angles to enhance the visual drama. You watch the interplay of color and motion, mesmerized by how even the river conspires to elevate the festival. By mid-morning, the preparations are well underway, the town alive with a soft, continuous hum of activity. You step back to take it all in. Carp banners swaying, children practicing, artisans carefully assembling decorations, and food stations radiating warmth and scent. Each element flows seamlessly into the next, a living network of traditions, creativity, and gentle humor that feels almost choreographed by the river itself. The afternoon sun slants low across the river, turning every ripple into a thread of molten gold. You wander along the bank, taking in the gentle hum of the festival winding down. The largest carp effigies stand proudly on their wooden platforms, tails curled as if frozen mid-leap, shimmering in reds, blues, and golds. Artisans move slowly, touching up brushstrokes, adjusting folds, coaxing life into every detail. Even small imperfections, a crooked tail, a slightly smudged scale, are celebrated, whispered into jokes and stories that will outlive the day. Historians still argue whether these were purely symbolic gestures or practical artistry, but you don't need an answer to feel their magic. Children drift along the water's edge, letting paper carp float downstream. Lanterns hover just above the surface, trembling with each tiny ripple. Some say these lanterns once carried messages to ancestors, while others insist they were meant simply for delight. You watch them dance across the water, hypnotic and serene, the gentle current turning each tiny movement into a slow, floating choreography. The scent of roasted rice cakes and sweet bean paste mixes with the earthy tang of river mud, grounding you in the moment. Musicians near the pavilion play softly, their flutes, drums, and strings echoing the rhythm of the water and the swaying silk banners. You pause, closing your eyes for a heartbeat, letting the melody and the subtle murmur of the river carry you deeper into calm. Children stumble and laugh, adults chuckle softly, and the carp effigies sway just enough to feel alive. Even playful mishaps, the dropped lantern, a misaligned banner, become part of the story, part of the living pulse of the festival. As twilight deepens, the lantern light stretches across the river, golden and fluid. The festival slows, but the current continues, carrying floating carp and reflections alike downstream. You inhale, letting the mixture of sights, sounds, and smells settle into your body. Every movement, every soft sound, every playful imperfection weaves together, and you feel it. The festival is complete, whole, perfect in its gentle imperfection. The river flows steadily, the carp float gracefully, the silk banners ripple softly. You follow the rhythm of the water with your breath, each inhale and exhale sinking to the calm pulse around you. The warmth, the shimmer, the laughter, the hum of flutes, all these details settle gently in your mind. Let them drift with the current, wrapping you in serenity. Slowly, the world softens, and you feel the festival's magic guiding you into restful sleep, carried by the gentle rhythm of river, carp, and twilight.